Hello everyone, it's Dan. Welcome back. What I have here today is going to be just a quick video, quicker than I had expected it to be, but I think it gets the point across anyway. This is going to be a review of AK Acrylic's paints. I've had two in my collection for the better part of the last year or so, as I'm sort of slowly branching out away from Citadel paints, and that's the Luminous Flesh that you see up in the top left there, and their Blood Red that you might have seen me use if you've watched some of my prior painting videos. And I've been so impressed with the quality of those paints that when I was at my local game store most recently, I decided I wanted to pick up about 12 more. I think it's 15 total that we're reviewing here today. So I guess it was 13 paints that I picked up just to compare, see if they hold up to the quality of those two first paints that I used, and give you, I think, a good idea. There's quite a spectrum of color here that I've selected, and see how they all stack up. I will say too here straight away, I don't know if it's going to be an unpopular opinion or not, but I'm not a huge fan of dropper bottles normally. It's just my painting style. It doesn't lend itself to like a lot of blending and watering paints down and stuff like that. It's a lot of base coat work is what I predominantly do, and dropper bottles tend to clog up on me a lot, so I have to keep paper clips handy to unclog them. It's not a huge deal. You can see obviously I do use paints that come in dropper bottles. It's just not my first preference, but I see why others would like them. So what I've done here, I'm an accountant by trade, as I've mentioned in prior videos. I work in corporate accounting, so I thought let me throw a grid up here and I'll go through and see how these paints look after 1, 2, and 3 coats. So that's what I've done. You can see the name of the paints in the leftmost column there. So what I'm doing is doing a single layer across each of these 3 columns, and then what I'll do is come back in for a second coat on the middle and rightmost columns, and then finally a third coat in the furthest rightmost column there. So what you'll end up with is a finished piece of paper with 1 coat on the left column, 2 coats in the middle column, and then of course 3 coats in the right column. And what I found as I was going through here and doing this first coat is that there were certain paints that were less impressive than the, I said, Luminous Flesh and then the Blood Red color. And that Fluorescent Blue is a good example of that. Most of them were really good. The methodology here was I would shake it for 10 seconds and then apply a single coat, as you see me doing there. Here I am going through for the second coat in the middle and right columns. So yeah, 10 seconds for shaking the bottles for all of them. In between applications here is the same thing. However, I found that the Fluorescent Blue, I think it was the Warm Gray, and that Matte Red, which surprised me because the Blood Red is so good, were kind of different from the others. All the other colors were really good, even with 1 coat. You can see with 2 and 3 coats, certainly they're, I think, complete coverage over white paper here. But I realized then, as I'm going through and doing the final coat here, I realized that this was probably not, like, it's useful. It's kind of a handy tool here to see how these colors look with different coats. However, I realized it didn't give me a good impression of the overall quality of these paints, kind of how they apply. So I thought, let me apply these to some miniatures. I'll paint up a unit, and then I think I can have a much better say on kind of my overall impression of these paints here. So that's what I did. I have a unit of Pistoliers, if you're the Old World player, or Old Warhammer player, Riders, if you're a 9th Age player. And these I thought would be a really good use case for these because they are in various states of paint. Some of them have just bare plastic on them because you might remember that I kind of broke them apart and put them back together as part of my big building video earlier this year. So that's what I did. I went through and I just started painting these up, and it was a lot of fun actually to have kind of a limited palette. I had those 15 paints, and I think if I had planned this out from the beginning, I would have chosen like a yellow, certainly, just so I could mix anything, but maybe another brown color instead of like 2 flesh colors and 2 red colors, things like that. But it forced me to do a lot of blending, to really like play around with this paint and get a better feel for how it applied and things like, as I said, how it blended together. So it was a fun experiment here. And you can see some paints went on excellently with a single coat. This is the beige color over horse, and I think most paints I would recommend you do 2 coats anyway. But you can see that's a pretty strong color straight out of the pot there. This is the white color, which is also fantastic. But what I found actually by the second day, because I was shaking these pots up so much, or shaking these bottles up so much, is that the 3 paints that I'd flagged as struggling a little bit more with coverage became better and better the more I was using them. And I realized it was just because I was shaking them more and more. So I thought you know, especially for like this warm gray color, which is a beautiful, beautiful color. It's like a gray, beige kind of color. I thought, well, let me revisit that sheet here at the beginning for those 3 paints specifically and shake them for like 2 minutes and see how they come out. And I'm glad I did, because what you'll find, you can see there, that's that warm gray after being shaken for a while. It's going on that tunic much better than went on the horse at the beginning. And so I went back to the paper here, I shook them all up for a while, and the coverage was way, way better for one coat here. That's what I'm doing. I'm putting another layer here on the leftmost column. This is one coat, and the fluorescent blue was still a little bit less impressive, but the matte red and the warm gray were like totally different paints when I did this. So I'm glad I went back and did this, and I found that maybe they were just sitting on the shelf for a long, long time and needed that little extra oomph of shaking. Whatever the case was, they were just like the others once they were shaken up really well. And I wasn't sure I was even going to share this with you, but I thought it was noteworthy because it happened to me twice on 2 different paints, and I've never had this happen with dropper bottles before. I'm still not convinced it wasn't user error of some kind, but you can see what happened is like the tip of the bottle there popped off and squirted silver paint in that case all over the top of my cup there. And as I said, I'm still not convinced I wasn't just being too rough with it. As I've said, though, I've used other dropper bottles from Vallejo, from Reaper, Army Painter. I've never had anything like that happen before. So those 2 with asterisks had the lid pop off on me. But other than that, you can see the overall scores here. I kind of gave them subjective scores on the far right just based on my overall experience with them. Is fantastic. Really, across the board, the only paint that I was less impressed with was that fluorescent blue color. But otherwise, it was all A's and B's. Really great paint for blending, for 1-2 coat applications. I highly, highly rate this stuff. Maybe it was just a single production run issue, or it was me just being too rough with the paints. But I think it's a good practice anyway. Just when you take the cap off of any dropper bottle, just make sure that the lid there, the top of the bottle, is firmly attached. And here's the finished unit. So I thought they turned out looking pretty cool. And I'm really happy with the end result here. I think it will be adding more AK acrylics to my collection. So let me know if you have any other suggestions here. I know there's like 2 thin coats of paint is another range that I'm curious to try out. If there's any others you'd like to see, let me know. As ever, I really appreciate you dropping by. And until next time, happy gaming.